Political conference season this year has rarely been more important. Last week, Labour's conference hall was full. Keir Starmer's speech was made in person, with an opposition, I use the term lightly, gearing up potentially for a sooner than anticipated election, possibly in spring 2023. And tonight, Tory party delegates head to the great city of Manchester in anticipation of the Prime Minister's keynote speech in the week. So this is a watershed moment in our recent history. It's back to business as usual for our politicians, and it's time to hear what their vision is for the country going forward. Any leader will tell you that their next conference speech is always the most important of their career. Well, this is particularly true for the Prime Minister this week, and here he is on Twitter getting warmed up for a big week.
Build back better.
Nicely done. Now, the Prime Minister's job is to reboot Britain, to throw off the shackles and get his government, his party and the country focused on the future. And crucially, the Prime Minister has to declare the end of the war on COVID. There cannot be a return to this scientifically debatable dystopian hell of mask mandates, arrows in supermarkets, remember them? Devastating lockdowns, economic damage, NHS waiting list and the already spiralling non-COVID death toll. We cannot go back there, folks. The threat of future measures is almost as damaging as the measures themselves. The government are going to have to wean themselves off the habit of keeping the country in a state of perpetual fear. They love it, of course, because it gives them power. It gives them control. But the public and businesses and our wider society cannot continue to cower under the sword of Damocles that possible future COVID measures represent. To truly restore confidence and to get the economy going again, to pay for all of those schools and hospitals and to tackle the 12 million long NHS waiting list, the Prime Minister must close the chapter on what, in my view, has been a failed scientific experiment to control a virus. Even if it was the right thing to do, and you know my views on the matter, either way, it's done now. I will give the Prime Minister credit where it's due in the midst of rising inflation, ever-growing national debt, a fuel crisis, increased energy costs and empty supermarket shelves. The blonde bombshell himself remains stubbornly popular. Enough people in this country want to give Boris the benefit of the doubt, and it's in our collective interest to do just that. We've all got to back Boris. But that political capital that he enjoys is a valuable and precious resource, even more precious to the Prime Minister than that real ale of which he is so fond. He must use this political capital, the goodwill of much of the country, and that 80-seat majority to break the spell of COVID and to snap us out of this hysteria around a virus that's very, very nasty, absolutely, but non-fatal to almost everyone. Under the cult of what I call safetyism, we have wrecked the economy, ignored other illnesses, many far worse than COVID, and we have lost lives and we have destroyed lives. This obsession with COVID safety appears to have made the country far more dangerous. The University of Bristol predict that creating the biggest recession in 300 years, which is what we did, will ultimately cost 500,000 lives. Safety first has, in my view, been safety last. Now, many of Boris's supporters will excuse his temporary suspension of his libertarian values because of the pandemic. But I don't buy that. I think it's in a crisis that you show your values, not ditch them. And the public will not tolerate a continued assault on our freedoms and basic civil liberties when the pandemic is all but done and the fat lady is about to sing. In the last 18 months, the Prime Minister has been noticeably unconservative and has conducted an extramarital affair with communism. He has delivered state control of people's movements. He's shut down the economy, paid people to stay at home, borrowed on an unprecedented level and introduced a police state. In the last year and a half, Boris Johnson has shifted so far to the left, he makes Jeremy Corbyn look like Margaret Thatcher. So it's time to draw a line under all of this and get back to not living, but actually living our lives to the full. There can't be endless daily COVID statistics or those wretched government press conferences where the PM is a stuck record with alas this and alas that. It's time to move on and change the script, Prime Minister. And that starts this week in Manchester with his keynote speech. There are two Boris Johnsons, as far as I'm concerned. The swashbuckling, confident Boris, who got Brexit done, and COVID Boris, cowering in fear with haunted eyes and in the back pocket of the doomsday sage scientists. Don't get me started on that junk modelling. The Spectator magazine have published further graphs from the NHS and the official Office for National Statistics showing how wide of the mark the modellers have been. It's an absolute horror show. The modelling was wrong at the start of the pandemic with a prediction of 500,000 deaths. And it's wrong now, as this graph demonstrates. So many sage scientists predicted that Freedom Day and reopening schools would produce a horrible surge. Well, it didn't happen. So, Boris, we've had enough of this country being run by scientists. We've learned the hard way that if out-of-touch technocrats are in charge, it's a race to the bottom and the road to hell. It's time for you, Boris, to bin the boffins and start leading the country yourself. That's what you were elected to do. We didn't vote for Chris Whitty or Patrick Vallance. I personally wouldn't let them run a fruit stall. And given that this government has now placed the highest tax burden of the British people since 1940, and since we've seen people's lives controlled for a year and a half, we've seen the economy deliberately wrecked, it's time for Boris to ditch communism and go back to conservatism. It's time for the Conservative Party to be conservative again. And if they can't do that, and if they stay wedded to horrific ideas like COVID passports, firing unvaccinated people from their jobs, and jabbing small kids, then another genuinely freedom-loving party will come along and do it for them. Reform UK, for example, and their leader, Richard Tice, made quite the splash up in Manchester this afternoon. Watch your back, Boris. So, Prime Minister, you either believe in freedom, civil liberties and personal responsibility, or you don't. You either believe in a dynamic, competitive, low-tax economy and free markets and in state growth rather than state debt, or you don't. It's time, Boris, for you to show conference and the country what you actually stand for. And the threat of future COVID measures are a no-go, Bojo. Your job is to unlock and unmask the country and put a smile back on the face of Britain. And we can all drink to that. This is GB News.